Let me paint you a picture of absolute humiliation. It's 2010, and General Motors just brought back the Camaro after an 8-year hiatus. 426 horsepower of LS3 Fury, ready to remind Ford who owns American muscle. Meanwhile, Ford's Mustang GT is sitting there with 315 horsepower, looking like it showed up to a gunfight with a strongly worded letter. 111 horsepower deficit. That's not a gap, that's a canyon. That's the kind of gap that makes Ford executives stress-eat in Dearborn while Chevy engineers pop champagne. The Mustang wasn't just losing, it was getting embarrassed at every stoplight from Detroit to Los Angeles. Every Cars and Coffee, every drag strip, every race that technically wasn't supposed to happen. But here's the thing about Ford. They don't just take a beating and go home. They take a beating, go back to Dearborn, and engineer revenge so complete it should probably be illegal. Plot twist. Ford was about to beat the Camaro in many head-to-head tests so convincingly that GM would need to rethink everything. And in 2011, they unleashed something that had been brewing in secret since 2004, something called the Coyote. And it would change everything. 412 horsepower. 412. 97 extra horses in one model year. That's not an upgrade. That's Ford's engineering department choosing violence and showing up with receipts. The jump from 315 to 412 represented a 31% increase in 12 months. Most manufacturers need an entire generation to achieve that kind of leap. Ford did it like it was a Tuesday afternoon project. I'll wait while GM engineers process why more valves might matter, because what happened next proved something disgustingly brilliant. And I hate how much I love saying this. More horsepower doesn't always mean faster. Sometimes it just means you're hauling around more excuses. Car and drivers strapped their testing equipment to the 2011 Mustang GT and recorded 4.6 seconds to 60 miles per hour. Quarter mile in 13.2 at 109. Motor Trend pushed harder and got 4.3 seconds. The Mustang wasn't just competitive, it was winning. Against a car with more horsepower. The Camaro SS had 426 horsepower, 14 more than the Mustang. 0 to 60, 4.7 seconds. The car with less power was consistently faster. To be fair, the Camaro wasn't slow, it was brutally fast. The problem? Ford suddenly got smarter. GM engineers apparently skipped the day they taught power-to-weight ratio, because the answer was painfully simple. The Mustang weighed 3620 pounds. The Camaro, roughly 200 to 250 pounds heavier. That's extra Chevy that the LS3 had to drag around like a guilty conscience. And the Challenger SRT8, over 4,100 pounds. A rolling apartment complex with a Hemi weight. That's it. That's the physics lesson GM somehow missed. Power-to-weight ratio. The metric that actually wins drag races instead of bar arguments. Mustang, 8.8 pounds per horsepower. Camaro, 9.1. Challenger. Let's just say it was built for comfort, not speed. Ford brought a scalpel. GM brought a sledgehammer. Ford brought intelligence, and GM brought excuses. Guess which one cuts faster? Now here's where it gets annoyingly impressive. The Coyote wasn't some warmed-over version of the old 4.6-liter. This was a clean-sheet design. Dual overhead cams, 32 valves, Ti-VCT, twin independent variable cam timing. Still with me? Good, because the engineering flex isn't over. Ti-VCT adjusted both intake and exhaust cams with 50 degrees of authority on each. This engine didn't just make power. It optimized power across the entire RPM range, like it had a PhD in violence. And that 7,000 RPM redline? Not marketing fluff. Car and Driver called it, and I'm quoting because this is too good, utterly fabulous. A 7,000 RPM cavalry charge that, in terms of smoothness, would make any Maserati proud. A $30,000 Mustang, compared to a Maserati, by Car and Driver. Meanwhile, Chevy's pushrods looked like cave paintings next to the Sistine Chapel. Ford's engineering team probably framed that review and hung it directly facing GM headquarters. The internals read like a performance shopping list. Forged steel crankshaft, fully counterweighted for high RPM duty. Plasma transferred wire arc cylinder bore coating. 80mm throttle body. Tubular stainless steel exhaust headers engineered for 7,000 RPM without grenading itself. The 11:1 compression ratio squeezed every molecule of energy from premium fuel. The all-aluminum construction kept weight down, while the old iron block LS sat there being heavy and wondering why it couldn't keep up. I hate how much I have to respect this. It's annoyingly perfect. $29,645. Under 30 grand for 412 horsepower, a 7,000 RPM redline, and the ability to gap Camaros at the drag strip. Ford wasn't just winning the performance war. They were winning while charging less. Now here's where it gets embarrassing for everyone criticizing Ford. The Camaro SS and Challenger SRT8 had fancy independent rear suspensions, multi-link designs, technology the Europeans had been using for decades. The Mustang? Still running a solid rear axle, a live axle, like it was 1965 and the Beatles were still together. And yet, up to 0.94 G on the skid pad with performance tires. The Mustang was matching or beating cars with theoretically superior suspension technology, using engineering from the Eisenhower administration. Ford was humiliating the competition with what critics called outdated technology. That's not embarrassing for Ford. That's embarrassing for everyone else. The Mustang was carving corners, while critics were carving complaints that evaporated the moment you actually drove the thing. Turns out suspension architecture matters less than suspension tuning, and Ford's engineers understood that better than anyone. But here's what the spec sheet doesn't capture. The Coyote wanted to rev. The LS3 made its power, plateaued, and called it a day. The Coyote kept pulling all the way to redline, begging you to keep your foot in it, rewarding you for wringing its neck. The tuning community went absolutely feral. Superchargers, twin-turbo kits, heads and cams. People were making 600, 700, 800 horsepower without voiding their marriages. The architecture was so good, Ford kept evolving it for over a decade. And today, the 2011 to 2014 Coyote Mustang GTs are becoming the collector sweet spot. Early enough to be the originals, modern enough to daily drive, powerful enough to gap most things at a stoplight. These are the cars smart collectors are quietly accumulating. Think about what Ford accomplished. In one single model year, 315 to 412, 31% more power. GM brought more displacement and more weight. Ford responded with less displacement, less weight, less horsepower, and more speed. The Coyote didn't win the horsepower war. It proved the horsepower war was the wrong war to fight, and then it won anyway. The real war was efficiency. The real war was engineering. And that strongly worded letter from 2010 turned out to be a knockout punch. So the next time someone tells you bigger is always better, that more cubes and more horsepower always win, point them to the 2011 Mustang GT. 412 horses, 7,000 RPM, 4.6 seconds to 60. And somewhere in Michigan, a Camaro SS with its fancy independent suspension wondering how it lost to a smaller engine and a solid axle. If you enjoyed watching Ford's engineering department choose violence with Stone Age suspension, smash that subscribe button for more stories of American muscle car revenge. Next time, the Boss 302, a track weapon disguised as a street car. This is Car Chronicles, where solid axles beat independent suspensions and Chevy forums need therapy.